Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 61. It's already episode 61. My goodness. So in this crazy episode, we are going to be doing a episode of Cilium with Tanzu Community Edition, and I have a special guest joining me today. My special guest is Deshaun. Welcome, Deshaun.
Hi. Hello. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'm glad you're here. Deshaun and I actually just visited VMware Explorer. It's called VMware Explorer now. Was it last week or was it? Yeah, it was last week.
Yeah, last week.
It all happened so fast. Anyway, so it was a really great conference. I actually got to catch up with a lot of really great folks that I worked with in the past at VMware and also in the community. I mean, I spent some time with some great folks. I got to spend some time with Kelsey Hightower. Got to spend some time with Solomon Hikes, who was the CEO of Docker, kind of the inventor of Docker. Just had a wonderful time. Had to hang out with Betty Juno. Just tons of great folks there, and it was a really good time. And in that show, I was going to do a demonstration of how to do Tanzu Community Edition with Cilium, because Tanzu Community Edition is actually one of the projects that I worked on at VMware, and they have enabled the ability for you to bring your own CNI, and so that was the point of the demonstration. And so Deshaun and I decided to do this live in eCHO office hours. So we have Russell saying hello. Good to see you, Russell.
Hey, my good buddy. Shake and bake, Russell.
That's right.
Shake and bake.
We have Ahmed. Good to see you, Ahmed. If you're in the comments and you make a comment, I'll be able to see it and I can actually raise it to the screen. So feel free to ask questions that way, or if you have anything else to say, even if you're just saying hello, it's great to see folks actually engaging with this stuff. So it makes it so that we're not just talking to each other, we're actually talking to you. So cool. What did you think of the VMworld Explorer? I mean, I know that it was probably very exciting for you because you got to do a keynote, and I saw that you're trying to give Kelsey a fist bump.
And right, he wasn't ready for it. My energy, I was like, oh yeah, this is great. And in rehearsals, I gave him the fist bump, and he was a little whoa, fist bump. And then he decided, like, hey, yeah, well, I'm going to do the gear shift, my Despicable Me, and and it was just fun. It was a little Easter egg. Kelsey's an amazing person, and I was lucky to get to spend time and learn from him. And just the energy. It was a great conference where I got just as much as I hope I was sharing. It was a huge learning opportunity for me, and the energy was great. I think it definitely created a lot of momentum. I can see it already in my Slacks and Discords and phone messages and emails and LinkedIn. I can see the momentum that it caused. It was definitely a catalyst for the community. It was a great conference. It was my first time ever at that VMware. It was the first VMware Explorer. So we got to be at the first one. At that level of a conference for VMware, it was super exciting.
Did you get to be? I mean, you've been to VMworlds though.
I had not ever been to a VMworld.
Oh wow!
So it was the first.
Yeah, I mean, and I think they've been doing VMworlds for some time, so it's a pretty well established thing, and so they've got a really good audience. And one of the things I like about VMworld, that was is I feel like they actually pull in quite a few people from all around the world, so it's really one of those nexus events where you get to see people that you just don't get to run into every day because they live in Europe or they live somewhere else on the planet, and that they all come to town for those things. The other thing about it is that they do an Explorer usually in two locations, one here in the U.S. and one in Europe, and so hopefully be able to do both is actually quite a lot of fun.
I'm going to assume that Ambu is there.
Yep, Ambu is saying hello to everyone. We've got Tim Burkhart with an elbow bump. Hoyvin saying hello, everybody. And Maz, good to see you, Maz. Anbu is jazzed. Yeah, we're looking. Yeah, yep. It was a good event, and it's also, despite how many people are there, they also have there's still a good opportunity, even just as you and I did, right, where you can step outside into the park, or you have a good opportunity to really connect with people. It's not because I've been to conferences that were just so crowded. Like there've definitely been KubeCons that were like this, that were so crowded where it's like even the hallway track kind of gets overrun. You know, like you don't really get a chance to connect because there's so many people.
And now one other thing about this conference is that they were really good at getting the content back out. So a lot of the content already able to access that. That's exciting, right? That the content is already out and shared. And there is definitely, I have a nice little list of all the things that I want to go back and watch. So just that, all the stuff that I missed, I have now the ability to already go back and get caught up.
That's on a YouTube channel, or where would I go to find that? Actually, do you know?
I got a link. I think it's on the VMware Explorer site. Let me see if I can find that. I'm actually not on my computer that has all that. I'll see if I can find it and I'll throw it in the chat.
Video lending. This might be one of them.
There you go. Yes, that's the one.
All right, there we go. So I'm going to put that in our notes so that folks who do want to go and see that stuff can actually check it out.
So yeah, that's the momentum, the what's the word I want to look for? Residual. Like I still have the feeling that the conference is still going on because I'm still watching the content. I'm still moving forward with the content. So I haven't consumed everything I want to consume yet. So I'm still holding out my opinions. I think my excitement meter is going to keep on going up because the content that I have watched has been pretty awesome.
Right on. My good friend Raphael checking in with us. How you doing, Raphael? That's awesome. Well, other things that we usually do at the beginning of the episode that we just jumped right into it. So we couple other things to note is that eBPF Summit 2022 is still open for registration, and the schedule is now live. If you want to go there, you can just go to ebpf.io at the top, and then right here on the top bar, it'll say register now, and you can register for that. You'll get to see more of me. I'm emceeing it with Tracy, who I believe hosted the most recent episode of Echo Office Hours. We're going to be co-hosting it and welcoming quite a few amazing, talented researchers, operators, explorers in the eBPF landscape, presenting all sorts of wonderful topics there. And if you want to see the schedule, I believe that if you go to the registration page, you'll be able to see like who some of our speakers are. Folks like Daniel Borkman, Laurent Bernil, Marga Monterola. Of course, the wonderful Liz Rice will be helping us host as well. And then basically this is another one of those virtual summits. So there'll be lots and lots of really great content talking about different things. We've broken it up by theme this time. So you have this idea of eBPF in the real world, folks talking about like how they leverage it and how they make use of it, eBPF for networking. And then on day 2, we get into like a whole different category of thing, which I think is pretty awesome. Where did it go? Thursday. eBPF for security and eBPF programming and internals. So if you want to learn to write your own eBPF programs or explore that space, these talks are really good. This is not the first conference that we've done like this. Unlike VMware Explorer, this is like just like VMworld would be. This is like one of many conferences that we've done. So you can actually look back and see last year's summit and see all the talks that happened there as well.
Registering right now. I was going to ask you, where is it? And you said it's virtual. Well, of course,
I'll be in Zurich when I'm hosting it, actually, because I'll be flying out to Zurich that week. Because one of the things that we do at Isovalent, which I really appreciate, are these things that are called Hive Time. Mm-hmm. And because we're very B focused, eBPF, yeah.
Yep.
So Hive Time is basically where we have like a particular vertical of the product or of the business where we get everybody involved in that particular vertical in one place, and we work on that topic, right? And so I'm part of the community vertical, among others. And so like myself, Liz Rice, Tracy, Bill, all of us will be there in Switzerland, kind of working on like how we want to improve the community program around eBPF, Cilium, Isovalent, all of those things. And we'll also be hosting eBPF Summit. So that'll be fun. And then, so we also have an eCHO newsletter. And this time I finally actually have a link for how you can actually click on it. So like in the docs, which are or in this note, which is available to you in the chat, but I am going to go ahead and copy it again and put it right here.
How long does a Hive, what did you say? It was Hive meeting?
Hive time. It's usually about a week.
About a week, okay.
Yeah. And we go back to different, we go, so we are dual headquartered. We have an office in Cupertino and we have an office in Zurich. And so depending on like how many engineers are on one side of that pond or the other, we may have Hive time over there, or if they all decide that they want to come to be in the San Francisco Bay Area for the week, then we'll have Hive time over here. It all kind of depends. So it's really nice to, just get some real concentrated time with folks. So the
network issues. So I'm going to shut down Slack.
Okay. And yes, there is actually watching parties in a few places as well. And so it is completely online, and to register for it, you can go to eBPF.io. All right. And if you wanted to subscribe to the newsletter, you can actually click this bottom link, which will take you to Cilium.io/newsletter, where you can subscribe to this, and you get a weekly thing put together by Mr. Bill Mulligan, who I think is maybe still on vacation, maybe not still on vacation. I can't remember. But this is put together in a very similar way to lots of the other newsletters that you see in our space. We break it into the technical, the ecosystem, the how-to, and events. And so if you're interested in these sorts of topics, you can subscribe and check it out. Lots of really great stuff. Some of the stuff that's coming in this week are addressing bandwidth exhaustion with the Cilium Bandwidth Manager. And this means that, if you have actually, it might be relevant to some of the stuff that you're doing, Deshaun, where you have maybe a low powered or a low bandwidth connection from your container orchestrator or your kubelet, and you want to make sure that each of the pods actually gets a reasonable amount of bandwidth. By default, there's nothing in place that does that. It's so if one of the pods is consuming all the internet, then none of the other pods are going to get much. There's some basic queuing that happens, but there isn't really a lot of enforcement that says each of these would be able to get a minimum of 200K all the time, And that's where Bandwidth Manager comes in.
That's very interesting. I'm trying to think of how I would solve that otherwise.
It usually comes down to TC. Yeah. Traffic control in the Linux kernel is usually how most folks end up solving that. But you have to have some way of understanding where you want to, where and how to configure that. And with Cilium, we kind of make that pretty easy to do. We have observability stuff. We have rewriting the control plane of BCC tools in Golang. So Inspector Gadget is now being rewritten into Golang, leveraging the Cilium eBPF library, which is pretty cool. We have learning eBPF exploitation. So learning how to using an exploit to win a CTF. Pretty fun. I like learning, with any technology. There's always the sharp edges that we don't see as we write this stuff. Lots of good stuff in the ecosystem and in the how-to. So definitely check that out if that's something you're interested in. The Linux Plumbers Conference is coming up, and you can register and join virtually. This is an interesting topic for us because we have a number of talks, right, where one of the maintainers, or I say folks at Isovalent are some of the maintainers of eBPF in the Linux kernel. And so you'll see a number of talks presented by folks that are coworkers of mine here at Isovalent. So exciting stuff. And also, if you're just interested in Linux and want to understand more about how the sausage is made, this is a great
that's days.
Yeah.
Does that say on the 12th? Monday?
Yeah, Monday. And it's virtual. And there's lots of, they got it broken out into micro conferences. So it's not it doesn't mean that everything here might be interesting to you, but some of them might be, right? There's some good stuff on Wednesday talking about IoT or internet
I got
IoT.
in the habit during the pandemic. I got that in the habit, a comfort where I would have like a TV up on the wall, and I would listen to the virtual conferences like just passively. It was like the office talk, and I really enjoyed. I watched a lot of Twitch. I really enjoyed having things just kind of going, as I was, getting my work done, and I got into the habit. And I'm really, really comfortable with that. And yeah, now it's all being re-swizzled. But yeah, that idea, I like that. I enjoy that a lot, of just kind of co-working from home with others, like listening to people code, listening to people talk, and every once in a while something will just like pop up. Like even a show like this, I'll leave it on and just have it playing in the background passively. Yeah, more than TV. This is the stuff that I do, right? So it always I can still work, and oftentimes I get, oh, you know what? That's special. I need to write that down.
Yeah. Yeah, and it definitely makes you feel like you're not the only one in the world doing about this stuff. Like you can hear other people talking, and make you feel like you're back in that like active environment. It's definitely one of a good way of dealing with some of that isolation that has come with the pandemic for sure. Well, cool. Let's jump into it, I guess. One of the other things that I should probably. Looks like I got a typo here. 1 second. Right there. All right. So one of the other things that Deshaun and I have in common is that we both worked or work at VMware. And Tanzu Community Edition was actually one of the pieces that came as part of the acquisition. Pardon me. Siren going by. Part of the acquisition of Heptio into VMware, which was one of the companies that I worked for. And it is basically a mechanism by which you can spin up what's called a management cluster, and then from that management cluster, deploy guest clusters. So it's basically a mechanism by which you can manage the lifecycle of Kubernetes clusters themselves, so that if you are a platform team or some other, or you provide Kubernetes as a service in some way to your organization, you can leverage something like Tanzu Community Edition or the paid version, which is Tanzu Kubernetes Grid, to actually provide you tools to manage the lifecycle of Kubernetes clusters. So instead of just saying, you know what, I just need to stand up a Kubernetes cluster and hand it to my customer, you can actually greatly simplify and automate and program that part of the task as well, right? So you basically can, either use this on bare metal, you can use this in AWS, you can use this to spin up clusters in a variety of different areas, different clouds. And they even have one of the early things that we developed in Tanzu Community Edition as part of the effort in Cluster API, which is an upstream effort, and it's the underpinning of all of this Tanzu Community Edition stuff is Cluster API. Cluster API in its testing needed some way of actually spinning all of this stuff up quickly so that we could determine whether things were working, whether we were able to actually get the code to function correctly. And one of the tools that we developed early for this was leveraging another project that I have worked on a bit called Kind. And I don't know how familiar you are with this, but I think it's actually pretty interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I've done a lot of work. So for me, the exciting thing was being able to have a platform and being able to run things on my laptop and have a similar system to what's going to run in production. So a lot of the work that I spent over the past few months was I wanted to be able to do it fast. Like, hey, I don't need my cluster up and running on my laptop. But when I do, I want to be able to hit a button. Oh, I've got Kubernetes and all my stuff is deployed. All my demos, for example, are deployed, and getting that time from T0 to T, everything's running as small as possible. And
exactly. Yeah. And Kind is basically, a similar thing to Cluster API, but it does the automation of just creating one single cluster that you can use to manage. And it can actually leverage your checkout of the Kubernetes code base. So if you are contributing code to Kubernetes, even if you don't leverage kind is used in the in CI for Kubernetes. So say I wanted to make a change to the kubelet, some function that the kubelet does isn't working the way I expect. I open an issue for that, and they say, yeah, that's probably not working the way it's supposed to work. Do you want to contribute code for that? I go ahead and write code to make the change. I can actually leverage kind against my checked out version of the Kubernetes code base to evaluate and determine whether the change I'm making is actually doing what it's supposed to do, right? I can write tests and run those tests. I can do all of that just by leveraging this kind project to do this stuff. And then when I go ahead and put in my PR on the back end in CI, kind will be used again effectively against my checked out branch in that PR to validate the set of tests that are, making sure that before this code gets accepted, it is well tested. It's used in test, and it's also really great for developers. Great project.
Oh yeah, I'm a big fan.
So how does kind get used by Tanzu Community Edition? Do you know?
When I'm using unmanaged clusters, like for me, my developer environment, that's where I spent most of my time. Is I want to stand up a cluster real quick. So I've got my little automation that says, hey, go grab it and stand up a cluster. And it creates an unmanaged cluster on my laptop. And it's already on kind. And then there's also a Docker extension for a Docker desktop that allowed me to go and say, hey, yep, stand up a cluster. And it's using kind of under the covers for that unmanaged cluster.
Nice. That's exactly right. So let's check this out. So this is the documentation for it. I've got a link to it. And then I think right now I'm just going to jump in and start working through some of the demo content that I was actually planning on aiming for. And I agree with Raphael here for sure. It's definitely a great project for tutorials and labs as well. And I mean, that's absolutely your point. It is really good for, being able to actually test the code path of stuff. Now there's some things it's not particularly good at. So for example, kind stands for Kubernetes in Docker. And what it means is that every node in the cluster that is stood up by kind is running inside of a Docker container. So we don't actually have to spin up a VM for every node. We don't have to have a specific machine for every VM. We can just stand these up in Docker. And to a great degree, that works wonderfully, right? It's like it has its own systemd, it has its own container runtime, it has its own a bunch of stuff, and so we can see all of we can test a bunch of different scenarios with this. However, all of them share the same kernel. So so every node is basically sitting against the same Linux kernel that is the underlying Docker containerizer's Linux kernel. So if you're using a Mac, right? And you create a VM that is the environment in which you're going to deploy these containers. And that VM's Linux kernel is the same Linux kernel that all of the Docker containers see, regardless of whether they're kind nodes or not. And for the most part, that's fine, but some things are not namespaced terribly well, right? So trying to figure out things like, limit the amount of disk handed to a given container isn't particularly well done as of yet, and there's tons of things like that aren't great, like if there's even in eBPF instrumentation frequently instruments the Linux kernel to understand how things are being done at a lower level. And if you think about it, I'm now instrumenting a single Linux kernel to understand how things are done across multiple systems. And that can get out of hand quick.
One of my favorite use cases, not just PCE, but just Kubernetes in general, as a developer on my laptop, is the idea. I've worked in these massive systems where there's hundreds of different apps that go together and make up that distributed system, and just being at the level, I kind of wanted to be able to touch and feel everything and test everything end to end. And with Knative serving, I can actually deploy a bunch of things on my little 16 gig laptop, and I can have them all scaled to 0. But when I need them, I can access them, I can run an end-to-end test across 50 different apps, namespaces, etc., all on my humble little laptop. And that's my favorite use case.
I think that too, for sure. Let me turn off this border for a moment while we work through the demo here. So yeah, I agree. Yeah, that is, being able to I'm fascinated by the idea of scaling to zero, because like how much time it takes to actually spin up a container, it's just the time it takes to start a process, which is very different than how much time it takes to spin up like a virtual machine and an operating system and a Linux kernel and bootstrap everything, right? And so like that scaling to zero thing is definitely more of a container orchestration thing than I've in our space, and I kind of love it. It's awesome. So this is what I've got set up here so far, and I was going to take you through a demonstration of leveraging Cilium or of leveraging Tanzu Community Edition to stand up a management cluster, and then to stand up a managed guest cluster, and then to install Cilium as a CNI into that guest cluster, and kind of walk through that process and show how it works. So the first thing I've got is I actually have the Tanzu CLI installed. List. I don't think I have anything. I don't think I have any clusters installed, but it might think I do. So I might have to like clean things up. Yeah, looks like I do have to clean things up. Tanzu management cluster. Does it think I have a management cluster? No. Good. Create. So this Tanzu command line tool, you can actually download it from the docs. If you go to tanzucommunityedition.io, there's a great tutorial for how to leverage this stuff. And actually, before I get into this piece of the demo, I do want to point out something because I found pretty awesome. Just a shout out to the VMware community real quick. As I was working through how to actually do this stuff, I realized, I was just working through because I had understood Tanzu and I've worked with this before. But then I realized, what? Other people have already done this as well, right? So here's an example written on September 5th.
Just days ago. It was momentum.
Of educateco.uk, doing exactly what I'm going to be doing in this episode. And I had like no idea that this was even happening. But basically what this is going to do is it talks about like what Cilium is. It talks about how to do it. It links you to the documentation. It talks about why it's interesting. And this person like gets all the way into it, like how to do it and everything. Grab the CLI. You want to configure your cluster with CNI none. Goes through the whole thing. I think he's actually using vSphere for the hypervisor. I'm planning on using Docker provider.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love it. So if you want to play along at home or anything else like that, I definitely recommend this blog. I think they did a great job of writing it up. So let's jump into it here. So I'm going to go through the process of setting up a new cluster. And this will be called the TCE MC cluster. Dash file.
Yeah, both should work. What's happening?
Cluster name TCE matches. Oh, I see. It's telling me that there is already a Tanzu management cluster. Yes. Nuke it. Because I had run this demo once before, and although I have cleaned up the resources that it was using, still thinks perhaps that, yeah. I'm going to show you a hack. Oh, that's a whole different containerizer. Local. Let's see where it was. Oh, it's .config rmsrf dot. Big Tanzu, haha. All right. So what that does is it wipes out the world from Tanzu's perspective. And since these were all just Docker containers at the end of the day, I'm fine with that. I wanted to wet that up.
Another trick is there's a command you can run to clear out all the volumes and stuff if you're wanting to start fresh. It was one of the recommended things, like, hey, let me clear out all of my existing containers and images before I start this.
Are we talking about Docker system prune?
Yep.
What is it?
I've got it in a script over here somewhere. But I got in the habit of doing that. Let me see if I can find it quick.
So with Tanzu, basically one of the things that we're going to be doing here is we're going to be spinning up a Tanzu management cluster. And to do so, I have to give that cluster a name. I have to tell it what the cluster plan is. And this plan basically describes like how many control plane nodes, how many management nodes, information like that. I have to inform whether I want to, what provider I want to use. And so in my case, I'm actually going to use the infrastructure provider type, and I'm not actually wiring up any of the identity management stuff, just creating a management cluster directly. If I was planning on spinning up the identity management stuff, here's a bunch of LDAP and OIDC configuration that I can pass in. Other information I can pass in, like ARC name and OS name, OS ARC, and OS version. And then I have to pick my cluster slider, which is the IP addresses that the pods will have. And I have to pick my service slider, which will be the IP addresses allocated for the services deployed inside the cluster, and whether or not to use an HTTP proxy. So this is kind of a look into what a standard configuration might look like for a management cluster. I'm going to go ahead and start that up while Deshaun is looking at where that is. Create. See.
Yeah, it was the same. I had the Docker kill all the stuff, and then Docker system prune all the volumes.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Yep. And then, you set up you had a YAML file for your management cluster that had those properties in it. Another step I took, because I had different environments. I got all the different hardware around the home, and I would have, one for downstairs, one for laptop, one for app toolkit. And I had these different clusters, but it's all back put into a repository. So I didn't have to go through the setup again. And I could configure them so they didn't collide. And I could have the advanced networking. I could have them do interesting things. I actually have 2 networks coming into the house. So I can do interesting things across these different networks because I've got everything set up.
Nice. So as usual in these environments, I'm going to show you some stuff that's happening behind the covers, because I think it's actually pretty interesting stuff. So what's happening here at the moment is that we're creating a management cluster, and we're using the Docker provider. And I think, arguably this probably should have been called the kind provider, because I think it's, probably a little bit more apt. But that's actually, but let's talk about why I say that. So if I use the kind command line tool and I do kind get clusters, you can see that there is in fact a kind cluster being stood up. And if I can, from the output of the information here, I can actually see a kube config that if I wanted to configure, I could use it. But go ahead and try that. Export kube config equals that path, and now I'm talking to that kind cluster. I do kubectl get nodes. There's just the control plane. If I do get pods -a, I can see a bunch of stuff that I expect to see, and I can also see this stuff here. Right. So the stuff I would expect to see are things like KindNet, Core DNS, Kube-API server, controller manager, all that stuff. Those things are all running as you might expect in a kind cluster. But then I also see that deployed on top of these things are the bits that are doing the heavy lifting at this moment, which are things like the CAPI controller manager, the cluster API, KubeADM controller planner, control plane controller manager. Very hard to say out loud. The same thing for the KubeADM bootstrap controller manager and the cluster API Docker controller manager. Now these things are all called controller managers because what they're doing is handling the work of satisfying resources that are being defined in the cluster. So if I were to do kubectl get machines, okay, you can see that there are actually machines being spun up in the background, right? These machines are currently in a provisioning state. This is the name of the cluster associated with them. We have a control plane node and a worker node. So now if I do this one more time, kind-lit clusters, I can see that there are now two clusters, right? There's the cluster that I was using for bootstrapping, and there's now this TCE management cluster. That is the thing I asked it to create, right? So it's temporarily leveraging kind to spin up enough Kubernetes so that it can host these control plane components long enough to then spin up the thing that you asked it to spin up. If I had used an AWS provider or the Azure provider or a vSphere provider, right, then I wouldn't see this second cluster happening here on my local machine. I would see that second cluster happening on that target environment. And then once it gets through this work, it's going to basically move the ownership of those resources that it created, and that's those machines that we just looked at. Basically going to move the ownership of these resources to the cluster that currently owns them. So in a way, it's kind of like a circular dependency, right? Yeah. But basically, this gives you the ability to scale up or scale down your control plane controller, your control plane cluster. We'll play with that a bit as well.
Right on.
We'll wait for things to settle here. Basically, what we're seeing in the output is that we're installing all of these things into the new management cluster. We're waiting for those things to become available. And once all of those things are done being set up, then I'm going to actually spin up a guest cluster while we're waiting for all.
Have little steps like that of having the YAML defined. Those are some of the tips and tricks that I did to, again, shrink that time. So I had all the time commands even in my script. So I could see like, hey, how long is it going to take? One of the values that I find in what I do is like knowing how long is this going to take to do these things and keep track, try to shrink them as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'm assuming that you're going to have for your guest cluster, you're also going to have that defined in YAML, so that these are steps that you could see being repeatable for whatever the need is, because you can do it. You can say, yeah, here, go run these steps.
Exactly. And so now that while we're waiting for this management cluster to spin up, I want to show you the task I'm going to ask that management cluster to do for me as soon as it gets launched, right? So once I actually have a management cluster, I plan on relying on that management cluster to spin up a guest cluster. And you can see that this is actually very similar. Actually, let me just do it this way. These two are incredibly similar files. One of the key differences is that I've given it a different name. I've given it the same IP addresses and all that stuff, I'm using the same infrastructure provider. But one of the things that's different is that on this left side, I've got a CNI line that I've set to none. And this is a documented feature inside of Tanzu Community Edition, where you can basically tell it, I want you to get this new cluster that you're going to create all the way up to the point where you would spin up where you would deploy the CNI, and then I want you to not do that part and just wait around for that to get done by something else, right? And and that's one of the things that we're going to be practicing here in just a second. Let's get that done here in just a moment. How are you doing, Tracy? Good to see you. Tracy's one of the cohort that will be with me in Zurich hosting the eBPF summit. I'm really looking forward to that.
Wonderful.
Zurich, by the way, is a beautiful city. It's totally a great city for traveling to because like they have really, really good public transportation everywhere. So it's actually really easy to move around. Like you don't have to. It's not a city that you like. There are definitely cities that I visited. Los Angeles is one where like you can't go to Los Angeles without a rent-a-car unless you're planning on really subsidizing somebody's income who works for Uber or Lyft. You know what I mean? Like because you have to go so far between places, right? Whereas like Zurich and places that like have really good public transportation systems, I'm like, I love it. It makes it so easy.
Yeah. I was in San Francisco. I was able to walk most places. And even if I did drive somewhere, I was like, wait a minute, how come it took us 10 minutes to get here when I was only like 6 blocks away? I could have walked. So
Yeah.
a lot of places I took a car to, I ended up walking to again later.
Yeah. Or grab a scooter or a bicycle or lots of, like tons of ways to get around.
The number of electronic bikes and scooters and people that were moving around on that blew my mind. How that seemed like a primary mode of traveling for that city, and I was very impressed how the city was laid out and how they had the lanes and everybody seemed to be safe. So that was great.
Yeah,
very impressive.
It is really great. Raphael points out that there will be watch parties. And again, if you go to the eBPF Summit page, I believe there's a link there, 2 different watch parties. And also, if you wanted to host one, that's how to do it. Tracy's saying this is the first time going to Zurich. One thing I will tell you, Tracy, that I wish somebody had told me ahead of time, which was that, like, in my head, Zurich is a really cold place. I'm like, oh, it's in the it's in Switzerland, right? It's gonna be like icy cold. I was there in December. I bought like a heavy jacket because I was like, I want to go and I'm gonna be ready in my cozy jacket. I never got out of a t-shirt the whole time, right? And I was like, man, like, why did I buy this really nice cozy jacket? Anyway. All right, so we have our cluster up. And I'm surprised that okay, there we go. And then in the log output, it tells me that it has configured it for me. So I can switch to that new one. Now, if I do kind get clusters, I should just see one. Which is that management cluster that I've created. And inside of here, I can see if there are any apps that have been deployed. I don't think that there are any apps by default configured. I guess there's some. So Antria has been deployed. Metric Server is reconciling the secret gen controller, Tanzu add-ons. These kinds of things are running inside of that management cluster. And in the Tanzu CLI, I have other tools, right? So my next plan here is to actually set up a new guest cluster where I will deploy Cilium. And so just like we looked at before, I've created this Cilium.yaml that has everything I need to be able to do that. So let's just see what happens with Tanzu cluster create Cilium file. There's actually even a verbose mode. FE3. Maybe it won't be too bad. And what will happen now is that I'm basically going to start creating a new resource, a cluster resource in the Tanzu management cluster. And that Tanzu management cluster will then go about interacting with whatever provider you've configured to start standing up the guest cluster. So in this case, again, I pointed at the Docker provider, so I could test all of this stuff locally. And what that should give us is pretty soon we'll be able to see machines. Oh, I didn't do it in name. Is that what happened? I thought I did.
I decided that I'm gonna play along with you side by side, and I'm gonna see if I can do the same thing on an unmanaged cluster on another machine. Because
get name and namespace of current management cluster. So something's not happy in the
Oh.
TCMC.
Sorry, I missed the error.
Let's give this a second to calm down a little bit. API server is responsive.
Yeah, this is one of those things where I've run into this. Depending on what else you're running. I said back when I shut down things. I like the idea of being able to do this on tiny box. Yeah, and sometimes what I set up isn't meant for a tiny box. So going through the steps to make sure that I've done that. But I've definitely run into that.
Now we're validating the config, so looks like maybe we're doing a little bit better.
Yeah. I'm going to ask a question. Can I do this on ARM64?
I believe that you can.
I believe that I can too. So we're gonna try it.
I think I remember seeing work in the Tanzu Community Edition to be able to support ARM for this stuff. So I think it's possible.
There are some things. Yep. There are some things that are going to work. Not everything, but a lot of things are working the last time I checked.
That is a fact.
So I'm not creating, the only difference what I'm doing here in you is I'm not creating a management cluster. I'm just creating a unmanaged cluster. And I'm going to tell it, oops, I'm going to update my config. I'm going to tell it, don't deploy a CNI.
Yeah. Siam has joined us. Good to see you, Siam. Patrick is sending us some good vibes.
In your config for CNI, did you just have a no value or did it say none?
I had specifically put in none. This is what it looks like.
Perfect. All right, I'm going to do the same.
Okay, so the interesting thing about the way that Tanzu Community Edition handles this is that the nodes, that it will basically wait for the nodes to become available. You see how it says waiting for cluster nodes to become available? Why won't the nodes ever become available? Nodes will never become available because kind get config first. I'm going to do this in a back channel way, but I know that there's a Tanzu way to do it. Config name equals Cilium. Unable to get cert. That's interesting. Okay, fine. Let's do this. Tanzu. What I want to do is I want to cluster config get admin and the cluster name for admin Cilium. You can now use this. Kernel get nodes. Hey, all right. So now the nodes are not going to be ready because there's no CNI. So this will wait until the timeout and eventually fail because nothing is going to do that Cilium install for us other than us, right?
Got it.
So in my case, now that I have a kube config that's actually pointing at that guest cluster, I can go ahead and just run Cilium install.
All right.
Leveraging the Cilium CLI, and if you wanted to go check out the Cilium CLI, it's actually like part of Arch Linux program, the public repository. You can also just go to github.com/Cilium/Cilium-CLI and download it, or you can go to our docs.cilium.io, and it will take you through a quick start where you can grab that document, or you can learn how to do it.
I'm doing that now.
Interesting question from Hi, which I don't know the answer to. Oh, sorry, drop right by. The question is like, will TCE support Openstack?
I think I'm confident in saying there's nothing on the roadmap to support Openstack.
Yeah, I don't think there is either, especially not the. I know there isn't anything in the PIDE product, but here's one of the things that's interesting, and that is that the way. So actually, just point this out real quick. So what we just saw was once I had Cilium installed, things started happening up here at the top, right? Waiting for cluster nodes.
I can talk to each other. Yeah, I can validate things.
And now we're starting to see the other things happen, waiting for add-ons installation and going through the rest of the work. So this is what this is the experience of bring your own CNI right now, is that if you would get to a certain point in the docs, and it wouldn't say like, I think it probably should say something like, okay, install your CNI.
Yep.
But it doesn't do that. It says, I'm going to wait forever for cluster nodes to become available. But when they are available, then you can grab a kube config for it, and you can continue doing the work.
Right on.
So now we have a guest cluster. Get nodes. Clear.
And the Cilium install used whichever kube context you were already in, right?
Yes.
I didn't have to set a target. Okay.
Yeah. So once I did the Tanzu cluster kube config, get Cilium admin. Basically, what this does is it puts that kube config into my context file, and so now I have multiple contexts configured, right? So I can actually interact with the cluster this way. Now, another thing that's interesting about the way that Tanzu thinks about, or the way that Cluster API is managing this stuff, is that this cluster now, I believe, is responsible for its own resources as well. If I do get machines-a, no, it isn't. It's actually in the management cluster. That's right. Kernel. So if I do kubectl config use context. Unset config. One second while I rewire the world. Tanzu cluster config get Cilium admin clear. Context. What? I actually even have it installed, and I still forget that I have it. There's a tool by my good friend Ahmed. It's called kubectx and kubeNS, and these two tools are actually really super useful. kubectx is I have it shortened to kctx. kubectx lets me flip between contexts without writing kubectl config use context. I could just do kctx.
Yeah.
So here we're talking to the management cluster. Now if I do a kubectl get machines, okay, I can see the control plane and the worker nodes that are a part of this cluster are deployed inside of the default namespace. So I didn't target a given namespace when I created it, so it created it in the default namespace. Yeah, kubectx and kubeNS are really awesome.
I'm pretty sure Russ has that included in his build as well as some of the tools that we deliver when we're trying to deliver a Kubernetes environment.
One of the other things that I need about Cluster API, right, is that now that I have this idea of like the cluster, I can actually scale things, right? So I can do that through the Tanzu command line tool, cluster scale. So I need to figure out the Cilium -W3.
Yep.
Let's watch what happens here. So, oops.
I can say I've never actually done this on a Docker deployment.
This actually does work.
I see it. That's amazing.
So what I'm doing at the moment is I've just basically spun up the worker pool for the workload cluster that I've created for Cilium. And what I'm watching on the output here is I get nodes for that Cilium admin context and seeing those nodes come online and get created. You just get nodes again. We can see as these things get spun up, we have now some that are not ready, and then they become available. Now I have 3 worker nodes. And I didn't have to do anything to Cilium.
Yep.
Right? Do kubectl get pods -n Cilium, or sorry, -n kube system, and I can go context Cilium. See, the Cilium agents have also spun up on those nodes. That's probably too much information, so that's easier to see. So I have now 4 Cilium agents running, 1 for the control plane and 3 worker nodes, and I didn't have to do anything different to make them available. These 2 just started 67 seconds ago when the nodes became available. And this is actually kind of the power of Cluster API, right? With Cluster API, you can make these changes to clusters that you're managing. You can spin them up, you can spin them down, you can upgrade them, downgrade them. You can do all kinds of stuff to them, including, I remember this being kind of a crazy risky thing, but let's do it anyway because scale.
What could possibly go wrong?
Right? Cluster, scale, Cilium. Help again. But you'll notice that I made a change to the worker machine count. But could I actually turn this into a highly available control plane? Let's find out.
Let's go for it. What could possibly go wrong?
Right.
Well,
it's Docker containers. Like,
yeah.
What? There's very little risk. Is Deshaun known for saying that?
It's his famous last words. He will not be known for saying that. I've been following Miss Tracy P. Holmes for a while. I like that when I see people in the community. I like to go back and look, and I looked up on Twitter. I was like, yes, I'm already following. I feel good about that. I was pretty confident that I was, and yeah, I like that. Look at this.
So we saw the new control plane come up. Now, some deep Kubernetes magic here that's happening in the background. But basically what's happening is that since we're changing quorum in etcd from 1 to 3, or 1 to 2 actually in this case, that there's effectively a reset to the data path that it was using. So we'll see the leader change, and then we'll see the new control plane come up. And now we're going to see, we shouldn't see that a second time because going from 2 to 3 should be low cost, but going from 1 to 2 is high cost. And I agree with you, Tracy. It's totally awesome.
Interesting. Look at that. It's always a pleasure for me to be looking at things from kind of a different lens. Again, I kind of lean into the developer lens, even though I play an operator on TV. I run these things, but it's always valuable and interesting and educational to look at things from a different lens. So I'm already getting a ton out of this session. Because it's not just, we're not doing things that are unique to Tanzu Community Edition, right? This is cluster API we talked about earlier. And the idea that having Kubernetes up and running is one thing, but then keeping it up and running, keeping up, right? Just a couple of weeks ago, 1.25 got released, and we've only got, that's only going to be supported until October, I think, next year. You don't have a whole lot of time to just be like hanging out, doing things. You got to take care of these things that you get into production. And so that's just the concepts of, these are some of the things I can do once I've got Kubernetes up and running. Wouldn't it be nice to be able to, oh, lucky us, we need more, right? We need to scale up. Great position to be in, and we can do it without having to think. Because I could have running workloads on here, just like I'm my Cilium workload. I can have running workloads on here, and this is something that can be done as a regular part of my lifecycle management.
Exactly. Yeah, very well put. I'll get rid of this because it's not necessary. So I think the next thing I want to do is I want to create a, I want to put something on this cluster that we created. Because like, what's the point of having it if we're not going to do something fun with it? So I want to show some of the stuff that we can do with Cilium, and I want to and kind of show how those things work. So I found a really good project written here that actually allows for the deployment of a by the TerraSky folks, that allows for the ability for us to go ahead and configure Kube-VIP as a load balancer mechanism. And we're going to put that Kube-VIP load balancer in front of our Cilium cluster. And then we're going to deploy some apps in there and just see what things look like. It's already 12:02 though, so we're going to probably wrap this up in about half an hour, but let's try it out and see how much farther we can take this experiment. But in the README, they actually describe how to go about this. So I'm going to do a apply-n. And actually, before I do this, because I always, I try to give credit where credit's due, because I think our community, like I already said, like this guy, right? Like amazing. I was just super stoked to see that somebody was already doing this, like, and I'm like playing with it, and this guy's already written like the how-to on how to do what we're doing.
Yeah.
But another one. Mr. William Lamb, who I think, gosh, I don't even know how to put this, but like William Lamb is like one of those bloggers that I think has touched more lives than probably we can really think about, like in real terms, right? Like, cause it's like, it's ridiculous. Like,
yeah, even the ones that we know about, right? The ones that share and, oh, thank you, William. I found this on William Lamb. Even the ones we know about. How many are there that we don't know about?
It's amazing, like it's absolutely amazing. So when I was playing with this, I wanted to install Kube-VIP, which is a project by a good friend, Dan. And Kube-VIP is basically a mechanism for standing up something in Kubernetes that will handle service type load balancer. By default, there's nothing in a Kubernetes cluster that will manage that. But one of the options for this out there today is Kube-VIP for managing the service type load balancer. So if inside of my cluster right now, before I install anything, if I were to just do an install of Goldfinger application, this would drop my Goldfinger application into the Kube system namespace. Sorry, the default namespace, because there's Goldfinger coming up in here. If I do kubectl get services, you can see that Goldfinger is set up as a node port. And if I wanted to create a way to get traffic into Goldfinger from the outside world, I might do something like this, where I'm creating a service type load balancer And when I do that, I should be able to see some outcome like this. Now, load balancers are generally created by something that's leveraging the cloud provider interface. So if you're deploying in Kubernetes inside of a vSphere environment, or in AWS, or in Azure, or any other cloud environment, basically what happens is we've requested a load balancer, and that cloud provider integration between your cluster and the cloud provider will say, "Hey, cloud provider, give me a load balancer," and then the cloud provider code will operate, and it will create a load balancer for you. We don't have a cloud provider, so nothing's coming to our rescue here. Like, this will sit here pending until the end of time, unless we install something like Kube-VIP. William wrote how to do exactly that, and he referred to VRabbi's TKGM customizations repository, in which there are a bunch of packages that that VRabbi put together for how to do this stuff. And this actually talks a little bit more about how Tanzu and Tanzu Community Edition work, is that you can actually build packages for these things and deploy them as apps and extend the platform in ways that are useful to you. So in my case, I wanted to extend it to support Kube-VIP. Now, one of the things I like about this particular implementation is that you can also specify what the IP range that will be used for the VIP range is. Which is a killer feature. Yeah, VRabbi is really awesome.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure he presented some of this stuff at
probably so.
Explore. And yeah, another person I finally got to meet in person.
Nice. All right. So we're going to install Kube-VIP, and we're going to install Kube-VIP. And the way that we install Kube-VIP, according to our good friend William here, is that we need to know kind of like what the range is that we want to allocate. Now, in my case, I'm using Docker containers that are part of a Docker bridge. And so the IP address range that I can use has to be contiguous with the same IP address range that the nodes themselves use. So one way for me to find that out is for me to look at what the node IP addresses are, or to look at the Docker network, right? If I do Docker list, there's my kind network, and that's actually the network that's actually being used for all of these Docker containers. So they're all in there. So what I can do next is I can actually assume that, in my case, 200 through 250 won't be used by anything inside of that range, which I know sounds risky, but
yeah, what could possibly go wrong?
You can see that it's like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and if I were to do that same get nodes command for the other cluster that's on here, and I can see the other two, 4 and 5. Okay. I think 200 to 250, so that'll be our range. And 7218, 200 through 50. This is going to be our configuration of it. Before we configure it, we have to deploy it. So let's go back into the Kube-VIP package directory. Go look at the README real quick, and it says that what I need to do is I need to do a kubectl apply of the Tanzu package repo global metadata and package YAMLs, and then I can create my values file, which I've already done, and then I can do a package install because the package is already known inside the cluster. So let's try that. I've got both of those things in there, and if I can do kubectl get package -a, I could see that there's a bunch in here, but including this Kube-VIP piece right here.
Perfect.
Apparently, drop that right into default like a crazy person. All right.
We're not animals. You don't do that.
Now I can do Tanzu package. I can read the file. I can read the README file again. Tanzu package install kube-vip -p. Terra Sky.
Yeah, a typo.
Want to see something cool?
Yes.
So that's what I want, right?
Oh, this is how I learn. This is how I learn. Love it.
So basically what I just did there is I grepped for the line that told me how to do the install.
Yep.
And I just passed it to shell.
Awesome. See?
And now that's actually doing the install for me.
Learning. More than just the Kubernetes, more than just Cilium, like we're learning life skills.
Yeah. Ancient bash tricks.
As you're doing that, I'm installing Cilium on my Raspberry Pi cluster, running 1.24, and we're just doing things in parallel, learning and practicing at the same time.
Hey, look at that.
Wonderful. We have an external IP. Look at that. And what the range you gave was what? What range did you give?
200 through 250.
Okay, interesting. That's what I thought you said. And I was interesting that we got 205, but still.
So now I can jump back over to the browser. Do 3218 202
205. It was 205.
Oh, 205. My bad. There is Goldpinger. And the Goldpinger is basically a tool that lets you prove that you have connectivity between each of the things and perhaps like some other outside hosts, right? So these are all entities. These are all pods running inside that default namespace. They're all resolving twitter.com. They're all resolving google.com. And they're also all interacting with each other. And they also have this thing called a heat map, which is pretty cool, which will basically show you latency, good threshold, latency between all the things. And then they have a metrics endpoint. So if you wanted to scrape this and throw this in your Prometheus, you can do that. Yeah, pretty cool.
Very nice. Yep, today I learned another cool tool.
One more thing I want to show, and then we're going to be all done. So
okay,
I have installed Cilium. If I do Cilium status, I can see that it's in there. I can also enable or Hubble enable. And this is going to turn on the Hubble functionality of Cilium, which allows us to understand traffic. This is a tool that allows us to understand what's actually happening in the network layer. So let's show this real quick. We're spinning up a component that's basically going to gather Hubble network events from all of the agents that are running and make it available to us as consumers. So now Hubble is installed. Now if I do Cilium status, see that it tells me that Hubble is okay, the operator is okay, and Cilium is okay. Now if I do kubectl get svc-n kube system, you can see that there is a Hubble relay deployed inside. Let's go ahead and expose that publicly as well, right? So we'll do kubectl create service. Actually, no, we're going to do expose kube system Hubble relay type node balancer name HRLB. My name is Steve. There is our IP address.
Oh, it got 200. Right on.
We have a command line tool called Hubble that lets us interact with that Hubble relay component that's inside the cluster. And so we can actually export Hubble server equals, and then that load balanced IP. And I think it's going to be port 80. Hubble status. Okay, well, it didn't work. Connection refused. Curl 72 0200.
We did our status. We saw that Hubble was up.
Yeah. Cube relay or Hubble relay should be here.
Yep.
Hubble. Let me make sure I have the argument right. Hubble server. Yep. That's 72180200. And that's correct, I think. You could all get SVC-N.
That's right. Interesting.
It is interesting. Let's try bypassing and going to the node port. Oh, sorry, Hubble server. Connection refused. That's a surprise to me. Yes, let's do Qpidal, TI-N, group system, Cilium. What I've done here is I've jumped into one of the Cilium agent nodes because inside of here we also have Hubble. We can see the Hubble status from here actually sees data for just one node because looking at this Unix var run Cilium Hubble socket interface. So if I were to do Hubble observe out of here, I would see events related to traffic that are happening inside the default namespace. And this is what I wanted to show you was like what observability that Hubble has on what's actually happening inside the cluster. But what I really want to do is I want to export Hubble server equals Hubble dot system dot local 80. If I do Hubble status
now you're still in the pod.
I am intentionally still in pod.
Okay.
Perl. Let's do host.
Cool. We're doing it live.
Yeah, we are. We're ripping off the Band-Aid because I want to understand why this isn't working. Good internet connection though. That's nice.
Yeah.
Hubble. Local. Hubble Relay is the name of the service. Is CubeDNS correct? DNS is running. It has been.
Mm-hmm.
Neat. It's an interesting problem. Of course, it's always something, you know.
Yeah. So
I know
what
why.
we're trying to do, and for those of us that are working on this at home,
Yes.
we want a screenshot of them doing this and working and uploading it to Twitter, because I'm pretty sure that at least one of the people that are watching right now, and I'm looking at you, Russ, I'm pretty sure he's already doing the same thing side by side.
There we go. I figured it out.
Yay!
All right. So the problem was, this is actually another gotcha. This is a foot gun in Kubernetes. The Cilium agent that I'm in is operating in hostnet, which means that in hostnet, its resolve.conf is the node's resolve.conf. So it doesn't know about hubble-relay.kubesystem.service.
Got it.
Service, right? So
I'm pretty sure it's, as you said, it's always DNS.
Exactly.
Oh no, because it offers even like DNS. Yeah, well, yeah. I mean,
when I took DNS out of the picture, I was able to connect, and now I can see that 6 nodes are happening. And now if I do Hubble observe and kube system default, I can see all the traffic that's moving back and forth, right? Which is
excellent.
Really cool. I can see
can you run the status? The command you did, it had a flow.
This is how many flows per second we're seeing. This is how many connected nodes, and this is the current and flows. So we're currently seeing the most number of flows that we've seen.
That's really interesting.
Yeah,
I like that a lot. This idea of connected traffic, I like the idea of multi-cloud. Hey, we just heard about multi-cloud, and I want to, what happens if something shuts down, and get an idea of where that traffic goes from one cluster to another and how that flows. So I'm thinking that I could, get a visible metric here to watch that. But yeah, we'll see. Something, I'm going to see if I can incorporate this into another demo. I've learned a lot.
So here's the last point is that I can also do something like this where I have annotated all of the pods to improve the monitoring of DNS and HTTP traffic.
Mm-hmm.
And now in my Hubble Observe, I can actually parse for DNS traffic. So now I can actually see the queries, the DNS queries, and what the results are. Right. So inside of a Kubernetes pod, when you make a query for twitter.com, because of the NDOS configuration in your resolve.conf, it's going to try all of the things. It's going to try twitter.com, service.cluster.local, cluster.local.lan, and then it's going to try twitter.com.
This is great.
Anyway, thank you for your time today. And
Thank
I hope
you.
everybody came out of it too. So
wonderful. Learned a bunch.
Yeah. That was a bunch of information. And it's really neat to see it working. It's lovely. It's lovely to see it. And I think what I want to work on next is seeing if there is any value in creating a Cilium package to install Cilium, because I think, as it stands right now, that the Tanzu, the bootstrapping mechanism will still wait for the nodes to become ready before it goes on to doing add-ons, which means that even if I created the package, Cilium wouldn't install because the nodes don't become ready.
But there is also a mechanism for installing packages. I know we're running out of time, but I'm pretty sure there's a mechanism that I think it's experimental for installing packages during cluster creation.
That would be cool.
Yeah.
I'll definitely check that. Maybe we can do that on the next episode or something.
Yeah. We'll do it live.
We'll do it live.
Duffy, this has been really, really fun and special for me. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. I'd love to see you getting out and doing more of this stuff. I think you have a great way of communicating your ideas and a great way of sharing your thoughts. And I think it would be awesome to see more content like this kind of stuff from you. So let me know how I can help.
Okay,
Maybe
wonderful. Deal. I've learned so much from you. Thank you.
Awesome. I'll see you all. Have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. Thank you all so much for your time. And I'll see you all next time.
Wonderful.
Bye.
Bye.
Where's my clothes? Hold on. I'm looking for it. One second. And there it is. Bye.